My name is Miguel Ferreira. At 35, I believed I had built a reasonably stable life. An apartment with a park view, a well-paying job in finance, and a marriage that, while not perfect, I thought was worth fighting for. How wrong I was. The first time I realized something was wrong was when I found messages on Vanessa's phone. She was 33, with impeccably maintained brown hair and a frightening ability to make me doubt what I saw with my own eyes. "They're just work messages, Miguel. Are you being paranoid again?" she said, rolling her eyes as if I were an irritating child. I believed her. Or rather, I forced myself to believe her, because the alternative would mean facing the fact that our 3 years of marriage were crumbling. But the clues kept piling up. Secret calls, work nights that stretched longer and longer, and that masculine cologne that definitely wasn't mine. When I finally confronted Vanessa with evidence that not even she could deny, her reaction left me cold. "So what? What did you expect? You're never here, always too busy with your precious job." Her voice was hard, without a trace of remorse. "Eduardo at least pays attention to me." Eduardo. Until that moment, he was just an occasional name in her conversations, a work colleague. Now he had a name, a face, and apparently much more space in my wife's life than I had imagined. What came next was a blur of tense arguments, sleepless nights, and consultations with lawyers. I hired Ricardo Mendez, 42, recommended by a friend. In our first meeting, his office on the 30th floor of a skyscraper in the financial district intimidated me almost as much as the process that was to come. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" my mother, Dona Helena, asked when I told her about my decision to file for divorce. At 62, she still believed marriages should be forever. "Can't you two try again?" "Mom, she's with another man. Probably more than one. Relationships are complicated, son. Betrayal isn't complicated. It's a choice." What I didn't know that morning, sitting in my mother's apartment having coffee, was that Vanessa was already plotting her next move, a move that would transform our divorce into a war. I wish I had guessed, on that quiet morning, the hell that was coming. The first sign that Vanessa wouldn't accept a civilized divorce came when she emptied our joint account. I woke up to a notification from the bank on my cell phone. Transfer completed successfully. Almost all our money had disappeared overnight. "It's legally hers too," Ricardo explained, adjusting his glasses while analyzing the bank statements in his office. The panoramic view of the city contrasted with the chaos my life had become. "But this will count against her in court. It shows bad faith in negotiations." Bad faith was an understatement for what Vanessa was doing. In the weeks that followed, she refused to take my calls, blocked my emails, and began spreading stories among our mutual friends. "She said you were controlling," commented Paulo, a longtime friend, uncomfortable during our lunch. "That you checked her phone, limited her outings, and you believed her?" I asked, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. Paulo looked away. "I don't know, man. She seemed pretty convincing." One by one, friends began to distance themselves. Some openly took her side. Others simply disappeared, not wanting to choose sides. The social isolation Vanessa was creating around me was calculated and effective. Meanwhile, the legal maneuvers began. First came the postponements of initial hearings. Vanessa suddenly fell ill, or her lawyer had unavoidable commitments. Ricardo assured me it was a common tactic. "She's trying to wear you down, Miguel. The longer the process, the more expensive and exhausting it becomes. Many people end up giving in just to get it over with quickly." "I'm not going to give in," I replied, determined. "We have a clear prenuptial agreement." Ricardo smiled slightly. "That's exactly what she's aiming for, finding a loophole to invalidate the prenuptial agreement." The loophole appeared 3 months later, when we finally managed to schedule our first effective hearing. On the eve, I received a call from Dona Helena. "Miguel?" Her voice trembled. "Vanessa just called me. She says she's very sick. Something serious with her heart. She said she developed it during the marriage because of the stress you caused her." I felt my own heart race. "Mom, that's a lie. She's perfectly fine." "How can you be sure? What if it's true? Could you live with that on your conscience?" That was Vanessa's specialty, planting seeds of doubt. The next day, as I prepared to go to court, I received messages from friends and even work colleagues all asking about Vanessa's condition. The news had spread quickly, exactly as she had planned. She'll try to use this to nullify the prenuptial agreement, Ricardo explained. As we reviewed our strategy one last time, she'll claim she needs financial support for ongoing and expensive treatments. We must be prepared. I was nervous but determined. She's lying. I'm sure of it. Ricardo looked at me seriously. It doesn't matter if we know it's a lie. What matters is what we can prove. When I entered the courtroom and saw Vanessa sitting there, pale and fragile as I had never seen her before, for a terrible instant, I doubted myself. And it was at that moment that I realized her true power, making me question my own reality. The courtroom was silent as Vanessa rose to present her case. She had completely transformed, nothing like the confident, vibrant woman I knew. She wore plain clothes, no makeup, hair carelessly tied back. Even her voice was different, weaker, as if each word required effort. "Your Honor," she began, addressing Dr. Oliveira, a 58-year-old judge known for her impartiality. "I never imagined being in this situation. When I married Miguel, I believed it would be forever, especially in times of illness," she continued, with an elaborate story about how she had developed a rare heart condition supposedly caused by the environment of constant stress and anxiety that I had created during our marriage. According to her, doctors recommended expensive and continuous treatments, impossible to afford without my financial support. The prenuptial agreement was signed under the premise of a healthy future, her lawyer argued, presenting a stack of medical documents. No one could foresee that Mr. Ferreira's actions would result in permanent damage to Mrs. Ferreira's health. I looked at Ricardo, who remained impassive. We had discussed the possibility of this type of allegation, but the elaboration of the farce exceeded our expectations. The documents looked legitimate, with medical stamps and signatures. Dr. Oliveira examined the papers carefully, her face revealing nothing. "Mr. Mendez," she finally said, turning to Ricardo, "would you like to respond to these allegations?" Ricardo rose calmly. "Certainly, Your Honor. In fact, we have some information we would like to present." What happened next changed everything. Ricardo didn't just contest the medical documents. He demolished Vanessa's entire narrative with surgical precision. "Your Honor, we requested access to Mrs. Ferreira's previous medical records," he explained, presenting another set of documents. "We discovered a disturbing pattern. The new documents revealed that Vanessa had attempted the same scam 3 years earlier with an ex-boyfriend. At that time, she claimed to have developed an autoimmune condition requiring expensive treatments. The case was archived when it was discovered that the documents were forged. But Ricardo had more. We also filed a request for independent verification of the documents presented today," he continued, handing a report to the judge. "As you can see, Dr. Carlos Mendonça, supposedly the cardiologist responsible for Mrs. Ferreira's diagnosis, does not exist in the medical board registry." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Vanessa turned pale, this time genuinely. Her eyes widened in panic when Ricardo presented the final piece of evidence. "And finally, Your Honor, we have photos here of Mrs. Ferreira jogging in a park just 3 days ago, apparently without any cardiac difficulty that would prevent her from performing intense physical activities." The photos showed Vanessa running, smiling, completely healthy, the opposite of the fragile figure she was portraying in court. Dr. Oliveira removed her glasses, her eyes fixed on Vanessa. "Mrs. Ferreira, are you aware that presenting falsified documents in court constitutes a crime?" It was at that moment that I saw, really saw, who Vanessa was. Not a skilled manipulator, but a desperate person, willing to do anything to get what she wanted. And as she stammered, trying to explain the inexplicable, I felt something unexpected. Pity. Not pity in a way that made me back down, but a kind of clarity. I was finally seeing beyond the facade, beyond the manipulations. And with that clarity came a sense of liberation that I hadn't expected. Forgery of documents, procedural fraud, and attempt to mislead the court. Ricardo's voice echoed in my apartment. as he listed the possible charges against Vanessa. Dr. Oliveira suspended the hearing, but this is not good news for your ex. I was sitting on my couch, looking through the window at the park where, ironically, Vanessa's incriminating photos were taken. 3 days had passed since the disaster in court, and I was still processing everything. What happens now? I asked. She'll probably be investigated. She may face criminal charges depending on the prosecutor. Ricardo paused. As for the divorce, we're in a very favorable position. The prenuptial agreement will be respected. I should have been celebrating. I had won, after all, but the victory had a strange taste. You seem distant, Ricardo observed. I'm trying to understand how I got here, I confessed. How did I not realize who she really was? Ricardo sighed, his tone softening. Miguel, people like Vanessa are exceptionally good at showing only what they want us to see. Don't blame yourself. After he left, I was alone with my thoughts. I began to mentally review our relationship, looking for signs I should have noticed. Small lies I accepted. Inconsistencies I ignored. Moments when I felt that twinge of doubt, but chose to trust her anyway. The next day, I visited my mother. Dona Helena greeted me with her usual tight hug, but there was a new caution in her eyes. You were right about her, she admitted. Serving. Coffee. I wanted so badly to believe there was something good there. We all did, Mom. We sat in silence for a moment before she asked, What are you going to do now? It was a simple question, but it caught me off guard. For so long, my life had been defined by the chaos Vanessa created, fighting against her manipulations, defending myself from her lies. That had become my routine. Without that, who was I? I don't know, I answered honestly. Maybe it's time to rediscover some things about myself. The following weeks brought a strange quietness. The divorce process continued, but with Vanessa discredited, her lawyers adopted a more cooperative approach. There were no more attempts to circumvent the prenuptial agreement. No more fabricated dramas. I used that time to reflect. I began therapy, something I should have done a long time ago. Dr. Lucia, a middle-aged therapist with a penetrating gaze, didn't mince words. You need to understand why you allowed yourself to stay in that situation for so long, she said in our third session. Not to blame yourself, but to avoid repeating the pattern. It was painful work. I discovered that my need to fix things, to be the hero, made me a perfect target for someone like Vanessa. I learned to recognize signs of manipulation. More importantly, I learned to value my own perception of reality. I also renewed connections I had neglected. I reconnected with old friends. I spent more time with my mother. I returned to sports I had abandoned years ago. One day, I received an unexpected message from Paulo, the friend who had believed Vanessa's stories. Can I call you? The text asked. When I answered, his voice was laden with guilt. Miguel, man, I'm sorry. I should have trusted you. It's okay, I replied, and realized that it truly was. She was convincing. That's no excuse. We were friends for years, and I let her plant doubts. We talked for almost an hour. It was as if a wound was finally healing, not just with Paulo, but within me. I realized I was finally leaving behind, not just Vanessa, but the insecure man I had become by her side. When I hung up the phone, I looked out the window of my apartment. The sun was setting over the park, bathing everything in a golden light. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuine hope for the future. Court of Justice, case number 4752-2025. Divorce proceedings. Miguel Ferreira and Vanessa Santos Ferreira. The announcement echoed through the courthouse corridor. 6 months had passed since the disastrous hearing where Vanessa's lies were exposed. Now we were here for the final hearing that would officially end our marriage. Ricardo walked beside me, his leather briefcase under his arm. Ready? More than ever, I replied with conviction. We entered the courtroom, but my determination faltered momentarily when I saw Vanessa. She was different, not the fragile, sick figure she had portrayed before, nor the vibrant and confident woman I had known. There was something genuinely subdued in her posture. Don't let yourself be fooled, Ricardo whispered, noticing my hesitation. She's good at this. He was right, of course. I couldn't lower my guard, not after everything. We sat down, and I waited as Dr. Oliveira entered, and the session was formally opened. Before proceeding with the finalization of the divorce, the judge began, "There is a pending matter regarding possible criminal charges against Mrs. Ferreira related to the falsification of documents presented to this court." That's when Vanessa stood up, surprising everyone. "Your Honor, if I may..." The judge gestured for her to continue, her gaze cautious. "I would like to address the court directly, and Miguel." Her voice trembled slightly. "I fully acknowledge my guilt in falsifying the medical documents and in all attempts to manipulate this process. I have no excuses to offer, only the truth." A heavy silence took over the room. Even Ricardo seemed surprised. "I have filed a formal request with the public prosecutor's office for a confession agreement," she continued. "I will accept all legal consequences of my actions. I am also in psychological treatment to understand what led me to this destructive behavior." She then turned to me, her eyes finally meeting mine for the first time in months. "Miguel, I know words mean little coming from me now. I've lied so much that I've destroyed any credibility I might have had. But I want you to know that I recognize the harm I caused, not just to you, but to everyone around us." I was paralyzed, unable to respond. Part of me wanted to believe in this apparent sincerity. Another part, more cautious, reminded me of how many times I had been deceived before. Dr. Oliveira intervened. "This is a surprising declaration, Mrs. Ferreira. I must ask, does this confession affect in any way your position regarding the previously agreed divorce terms?" "No, Your Honor," Vanessa replied. "I fully accept all terms based on the prenuptial agreement. I am not seeking any financial compensation." Ricardo looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I nodded slightly. "Your Honor," Ricardo said, standing up, "my client is satisfied with the previously agreed terms and does not oppose the expedited procedure to finalize the divorce today, if possible." The next few minutes passed like a dream. Documents were signed. Formal statements were recorded. In less than an hour, my marriage was officially over. In the hallway after the hearing, I found Vanessa alone, waiting for the elevator. I hesitated, but then approached her. There were questions that needed answers. "Was it real?" I asked simply. "Any part of it?" She looked at me, her eyes red from crying. "At the beginning, yes. I truly believed we would be happy. But then, something inside me changed. I can't explain it. It's as if I couldn't stop lying, manipulating. Why the false documents? Why go so far? Because losing terrified me. Losing you, losing status, losing security." Her voice faltered. "But in the process, I lost something much more important. I lost myself." The elevator arrived with a soft ding. Vanessa hesitated before entering. "You don't need to forgive me," she said. "I just hope that someday you find someone who truly deserves you." The doors closed and she disappeared. I stood there, feeling a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and something unexpected. A sense of closure. "Miguel?" Ricardo's voice brought me back. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," I answered, surprised to realize it was true. "I think it finally is. 3 years have passed since I signed the divorce papers. Time, that persistent healer, has done its work better than I could have imagined. The memories that once seemed like open wounds are now just stories that tell part of my journey. This morning, while running through the park, a habit I acquired during my recovery, I recognized a familiar figure sitting on a bench near the central fountain. Vanessa. It was the first time I had seen her since the courtroom. Her hair was shorter, her style simpler. She didn't notice me immediately, absorbed in a book. For a moment, I considered changing my path, avoiding the encounter. But something inside me, perhaps curiosity, perhaps the need to confirm my own healing, made me continue in the same direction. When I approached, she looked up. There was an instant of recognition, followed by an expression I couldn't completely decipher. Surprise, perhaps anxiety. "Miguel?" she said simply. "Vanessa?" I replied, stopping. "How are you?" "I'm better," She closed the book. I noticed it was a text on psychology. I finished my community service last year. I'm working now at a nonprofit organization that helps people in debt. I nodded, not knowing exactly what to say. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of our shared past. I heard about your project with social startups, she finally continued. It seems to be going very well. Yes, it is. I was surprised she knew. It's rewarding to see small companies grow while making a real difference in the community. Another silence. Miguel, I know it probably doesn't mean much, but I'm truly sorry. Her words came out quickly, as if she feared I would leave before she could say them. Therapy helped me understand my destructive patterns. It's not an excuse for what I did, but I hope you've found some peace. I looked at her, really looked at her. There was no manipulation in her eyes now, no hidden agenda I could detect. Just a woman confronting the consequences of her past actions. I have, I answered honestly. I hope you have too. She nodded, her eyes briefly welling up. I'm on my way. We said goodbye without promises of future contact, without renewed ties. Some bridges once burned should not be rebuilt, but as I continued my run, I felt a weight. I didn't even know I still carried dissipate in the morning air. Tonight I'm celebrating my 38th birthday with a small group of close friends in my apartment. Among them is Carolina, an architect I met through work 8 months ago. Our relationship is new, cautious, built on foundations of honesty and communication that I learned to value above all else. What are you thinking about? Carolina asks, finding me alone on the balcony while the others chat inside the apartment. About paths, I reply. How they bend, separate, and sometimes cross again in unexpected ways. She smiles, understanding more than I explain. Carolina knows my story, not the sordid details, but enough to understand the scars I carry. Do you regret it? She asks, her voice soft in the night. Any part of it? I consider the question carefully. The failed marriage? The lies I believed? The pain I faced? No, I finally answer. All of that brought me here, and here is exactly where I need to be. On the horizon, the city lights shine like earthbound stars. I think about Dona Helena, who finally stopped worrying excessively about me. About Ricardo, who became a friend beyond being a lawyer. About Paulo and the others who remained by my side. About the younger version of myself, who could never have predicted this journey. Mostly, I think about the man I have become. Not perfect, certainly. Still struggling at times with fully trusting. Still learning to completely lower my defenses. But whole, authentic. True to myself in a way I never was during my marriage. Vanessa's manipulations almost broke me. But in the cracks, as the proverb says, is where the light gets in. And through those cracks, I rediscovered not just who I was, but who I could become. Carolina intertwines her fingers with mine, and together we watch the night envelop the city. The future, with all its uncertainties and possibilities, stretches before us. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of the unknown. I'm ready for the next chapter.